And I started to solo, and there was an incredibly tingling feeling in my hands. I put my hands on the saxophone, started playing, and it was as if my hands and the saxophone merged, and I could feel the whole experience of being me and the saxophone at the same time. Unity is here with us now. We may not be fully experiencing it. See, that's the thing for me that's so important to recognize, that we're whole people. To open up that door, we also have to accept the shadow. The beginning of this life is also the beginning of the death. So if I'm here, and this was Osho too, celebrate everything. Be here now. This is it, man. You don't have another it.
Hi, my name is Dave, and this is the Light Forest Podcast, a journey of exploration to bring more light into how we live and regenerate our planet.
Hello, and welcome back to the Light Forest Podcast. I'm your host, Dave, and together we go on journeys. We have deep, reflective conversations with changemakers from around the world to explore the roots to our planetary crisis and to better understand ourselves and how we might live with more light. After the last two episodes, where we've had really amazing conversations with Jules Yim and Naresh Singh into understanding some of the core problems of our planet, particularly climate change, and understanding how so many of the roots lie in the inner dimensions, our minds, our bodies, and who we think we are. So in this conversation, we're kind of picking up where both of them left off, but turning our attention inward, turning our attention into these inner dimensions, into our minds, and learning how we might understand ourselves better. In this episode, we journey deep into the light forest with William Raitt, who shares many stories, insights, and techniques from his long life as a musician, psychologist, and psychedelic elder, born in California in 1941 and living in Thailand now for 33 years. As a therapist, William developed his own approach, which he calls life streams, integrating Eastern and Western techniques and philosophies to help people do the inner work and experience the wholeness of life that is our true nature. In this conversation, start out with William explaining life streams to us and guiding me almost like a mini session to how we might bring more awareness to our mind, our emotions, our intuition, and be more embodied. And we also learn a lot more about life streams through William's own stories and experiences. He shares a few with us that were really amazing. An experience of unity consciousness as a musician, standing on stage playing the saxophone, then spending 1967 San Francisco experiencing the Summer of Love with 17,000 people all taking acid together with psychedelic pioneers such as Timothy Leary, among others. William has lived a colorful life. He's spent time in many worlds. And now, aged 84, William is, in his words, on the last chapter of his life. He experienced a stroke earlier this year, and in his words, he can feel death is imminent. He wants to share and pass off his knowledge and experience to as many people who are open to receive them. So I'm really grateful to have had the chance to take this walk with William and share it with all of you. So before we move on to the conversation, I just want to thank you for joining. And if you haven't subscribed already, I would love it if you could hit that button on whatever app or platform that you're using. It helps me grow the forest, and it helps me share the message of my guests with as many people as possible. So with that, we can move into our conversation with William. William, welcome to the Light Forest Podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I feel honored and I feel very excited. I have not been doing much speaking out in the outside world, and it seems like it's become time for me to start saying something.
Lovely. Well, I'm glad that you could choose to enter your foray back out with me and with Light Forest. And as we stand on the edge of the forest, metaphorically speaking, our paths no doubt will take us into many places. So to start off, I'll invite you, William, to bring me into your present moment, into your reality, as it will, and how that guides your streams into life.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely perfect. The bottom line for me, which is very simple, and we all understand it, is that this present moment is reality. Reality is right here and right now, and it's not anyplace else. And this is something that we can understand intellectually. In my own life, my pathway has been to try to make the experience of this moment more full and more wide and more deep. And that's been pretty much what I've been doing for these whole 83 years or 84 years.
So we have listeners listening to this podcast right now. Presumably they may be walking, moving around, or perhaps are sitting down. What are some of the ways where you might guide all of us to get us interacting and alive and awake to our moment more clearly?
Well, what I've done is to look at what this moment is, how it's created, basically. And I've refined it, and this is not my own. I mean, everything that I have to say isn't coming from me creating it. It's all coming from the wonderful teachers and people that have come through my life. So I'm just a conduit for information. I'm not a creator as such. So I've taken the idea of there being 4 streams of experience that we human beings have as a way of being in the world. And the first stream is the stream of embodiment or sensation. I mean, here we are, and we have this experience. If you've done any internal looking at yourself in terms of your sensations, when the time that I was working as a psychologist, I worked with several people involved in sports, and those were people who had a very deep, visceral sense of who they were as bodies. I know, Dev, you mentioned that you do Qigong, so I practiced Tai Chi pretty intensely for about 10 years. And as I think back on that time, who I was as a body in the beginning radically shifted in the 10 years that I studied. And I would imagine you could talk a bit about that yourself in terms of your own practice.
Right. So first stream is embodiment and being aware, primarily then through our 5 senses into the.
Yeah, and the movement through space and time in the body too. How we move, we all have kind of a pace that's us. We have a walking style. That becomes very interesting to start playing with. I mean, I walk through the world and I have sort of the William tempo that I walk at. What happens if I just slow it down a wee bit? And all of a sudden, by doing that, I create a different sense of my experience with the world. And that's one you can play with. Also, just talking. What happens if I start talking a little more quickly? I've just changed a little bit. Or if I pull back a little bit and start speaking more slowly and more quietly. So there's this whole experience of being a human being with all of these potentials that each time I move and take awareness of them, I'm changing into a different sense of myself.
And when I hear you say this, I definitely, think back to what today in modern world is called mindfulness. But I think I hear something deeper too, because if you're talking about embodiment as just this first stream, there's 3 other streams that, take you into a deeper journey than just being mindful, as it were, as they speak about today.
Yeah.
So how do the other 3 streams come in?
Yeah. I just mentioned one thing. You use the word mindful, which speaks to the intellect. And I think about it in terms of holistic or whole awareness. So mindfulness is part of the game, but it's not the whole game. So the second stream would be emotionality and my feeling states. And they're also infinite. I mean, as a therapist, that was one of the main streams that we would follow. For so many people, emotionality has been something that's been severely restricted or curtailed. And, we get programmed to see who we are emotionally by that cultural experience that we're given. So being raised in America by a Canadian couple, My parents were from Canada, which creates kind of an interesting game for me, in that I was not 100% American. And my emotionality was formed by two cultures. So we have, think about us. Each one of us is programmed with all the emotional states. It's not like you're given XYZ and I have ABC. They're built into us. And each one of us has explored to one degree or another the different emotions. Some of them happen as a result of impact from the outside world. But I can just sit and notice that right in this moment, I have an emotionality going on. Now, for me, I'm feeling some excitement and some joy. I can feel, I could probably, if I expanded it, I would probably get up and dance. Yeah. So that's where I am in terms of emotion right now. It's interesting because 10 minutes ago, while I was trying to set up all the technology stuff, I was feeling fear and trepidation. Oh my God, how do I get to dev? What do I do with this damn machine? So there's always the flow that's going on, the shifting and changing. And as we get more aware, both of our sensory states and our emotional states, we start feeling this change that's going on. The Buddhists talk about anicca. That's kind of one of the basic Buddhist ideas, which is everything is constantly shifting and changing. Every moment there's infinite change going on. And that can be both incredibly exciting and sometimes terrifying.
Yeah. I think when I hear emotions and emotional states, the two things that come to me, one is, while we are programmed to feel the whole spectrum, I certainly feel from my experience, like some emotions are easier to come by. Some emotions, particularly for me, maybe feeling into sadness or anger, tend to be more difficult.
Yeah.
And I sometimes also wonder how much of the programming of our modern society or culture, which is primarily trying to, prop up the good emotions,
Yeah.
and suppress the bad emotions. And in some ways, we're not really attuned to feeling the whole spectrum. But what I hear you say is that if we are to experience the depth of life, we have to be open to this full spectrum. At least that's been your experience.
Yeah. And the issue that we face is each one of our individual programmings have allowed us opening to certain aspects. I was given the programming that getting angry was bad. I remember getting in a scuffle with someone when I was a young boy, and I think it was my mother that said, "Dogs fight, human beings don't." And that was like a little programming that I got. Later in my life, actually, in a therapy session, my own therapy, I touched into my rage, and I was terrified of it because in this organism, I have murderous rage. That's part of my programming, and I don't like it particularly, and I'm certainly not interested in acting it out, but it's part of who I am. And then something comes along. I've been interviewing people who have been in war, and they talk about the rage and the fears and things that come up when the outside world demands that you interact with it or you die. So there's the emotionality. Side issue that I think is important is I see the human experience as a way of answering a primary question: who am I? So I answer it through my sensations, emotions. I have a couple more we can talk about, but we have to also go back and recognize that our basic programming starts at the moment of conception. And we spend 9 months in the womb in a protected place, which is an emotional situation in itself. And I remember back when I was doing therapy, having someone come in that had a crack baby. She was a crack addict, and she had been using crack all during her pregnancy, and her baby was really in deep trouble. So here is a being coming on the planet that's already traumatized before the little one is even out of the womb. And then we get birth. And how can birth not be one of the most powerful experiences that a human being can have? There was a book back in the 30s by a psychoanalyst named Otto Rank called The Trauma of Birth. And that was the first time that I ran into the idea that there was birth trauma. Later, there's a man named Stanislav Grof, who was a Czechoslovakian psychiatrist who did most of the LSD research in Czechoslovakia. He had access to like 4,000 LSD sessions. So he talked about the 4 stages of birth and how if you get trapped in one of the stages, it affects your personality style. And birth trauma has to do with who we are even before we're socially conditioned. So I think that's important to remember, because what happens a lot is it's like, oh, well, your mom dropped you on your head and that's why you're the way you are. And everything gets pushed on just the cultural experience. And it's much deeper than that. And if you look at like a tradition, say from India, where you have the idea of reincarnations, and you're not just talking about this one, you're talking about many. So the game gets just bigger and bigger and more expanded.
I mean, when I hear you bring up, well, really taking this loop from the 9 months of pregnancy and being born, and on some level it feels like, what agency do I even have? Like if all this programming and then not even factoring in past lives, it's like, am I sitting here as this person talking to you, just acting out a whole loop of code that I don't even know is just working, and here I am trying to be this successful, meaning just put together, functional, content being, while there's all this, programming working in the background.
Right. Well, we can get to that. That's 2 more steps up.
Okay.
The next step is mind and thinking. So
this is stream number 3.
Number 3, yeah.
Yeah.
So we think. Now, what's interesting is, particularly in Western culture, there was an incredible shift in the culture's consciousness. And they talk about René Descartes, who said, I think, therefore I am. And if you look at Western culture is built on that assumption. I am who I think I am. That's what you were talking about a little bit. Yeah. So I become a thinker. And one of the issues that I have in working with people is, particularly people that are very educated, is they have become thinkers and they're no longer feelers or sensors. And part of the issue of life streams is, how do we embody and integrate those 3, plus the next one I'll talk about next, into ourselves. So we have this thinking that we do. And as a tool, thought is just incredible. I mean, we can utilize it to conceptualize, we can use it to compare, we can use it to make choices, any number of things. So it's a wonderful tool. But as an identity, it's partial. It's not bad. I remember back in the 60s when the ethos was, we got to get rid of the ego. Got to kill the ego. There was this poster that said, all have a policeman inside of our heads that we need to kill. Well, that was some of the naivete of the 60s. So there's thinking. And then the next one is intuition. And that's sort of a wider realm. We could look at it in terms of dream states and archetypes and altered states of experience and all of the kind of more subtle aspects of ourselves. And, as we sit here, there's kind of an intuitive sense, a bigger sense of who we are. And the other 3 are sensation, feelings, and thinkings are subsumed by this kind of bigger picture.
Well, thank you for painting that and taking us from, this embodied sense of reality and moving to the 4 streams, finally from mind, number 3, and then intuition and 4th. I When I heard you talking about mind, I mean, I can relate so much. Sometimes I feel like the mind is just whizzing at a speed that's just so much faster than life around me. Particularly life when I mean like the trees and the birds and
Oh, yeah.
natural life around me. And then it feels like the mind and the intuition, and correct me if my characterization doesn't check out, but it's sort of almost competing, because like the mind doesn't want to leave room for the intuition, because there's that me, the I, that is so connected to the mind, and letting go of that seems to me a tension point.
Yeah. Well, there's different tension points. There's also, for most of us, a tension point between thinking and feeling, which in the therapeutic process, that's the big one. That's the one that most therapy is built on. Yeah, we could talk about it. There's a couple of different ways of.
Let's talk about the tension between the thinking and the feeling, because I think that's something. I mean, I can relate to it. I know many people do as well, where we think about our emotions sometimes, rather than actually feel our emotions, and we think that that's often okay or enough. Yeah, expand this tension point for me.
Okay, well, we'll go back to I think, therefore I am. I use thinking as a primary identity. So with the four streams, most of us have one stream that's sort of in the foreground and the other ones are in the background. So you're a thinker. I've got kind of a weird schizophrenia. Maybe it's because of my background, but I have a lot of intuition and my thinking is secondary. And for me, my intuition just comes crashing into my thinking. And oftentimes I'll be overwhelmed by it, and then I'll hold on to thinking as a way of, if we go back to my basic assumption that we're always answering, who am I? So what you're talking about who am I as a thinking dev. And then there's the other streams that are there that are going on. I mean, it's not that they aren't happening. It's that your programming has allowed you a certain formulation of the streams. So you have feelings, and you've been programmed throughout the whole system to have those feelings, some of them more available, some of them less available. I was talking about getting in touch with my rage. Well, that had nothing to do with my social programming. I was supposed to be a good boy, and good boys don't get angry. And yet, as I said, as a human being, I have it all, and as you said. So here we have this situation where you and I have similar games in terms that we've developed our intellects fairly clearly. And that becomes, I think, therefore I am. So I walk around. Now, what's interesting about the intellect is it can do a very strange thing. It can ask unanswerable questions. So what is the meaning of life? Okay. Let me say I don't know, or let me give you 10,000 different answers. I mean, it's like the mind can do this circularity, which is what causes obsession in terms of psychological conditioning.
Almost like a justifying of its existence. Like as long as it has questions to answer, then it's got a reason to be.
Yeah, I'm thinking. What do you think about that? But see, what's interesting, and particularly I look at my earlier life. I started playing music when I was 15. I started playing professionally. I had a little band. And by the time I was 17, I was playing in bars. And
where were you growing up in?
I grew up in Fresno, California, which is Central California. Okay. And at that time, this was the 50s. So it was pretty segregated. And for some reason, I was just drawn to blues, rhythm and blues music. And it was like an addiction for me. And that was the music I gravitated towards. The bars that I played in were mostly working middle-class black bars. So the culture was the black culture. Now, that was a culture that I came up in my formative years. And people didn't sit around talking about, well, what do you think about that? It was, do you feel me? How do you feel about that? And these were people who were primarily oriented towards emotionality. And so and you can see that. I mean, here in Thailand, it's so interesting because Thai people have there's a balance that's very different than most cultures. And part of it, I think, is the underlying Buddhist tradition, which is a holistic tradition. It holds everything. But that, that becomes just one of the interesting issues. How much of me have I been programmed to allow my experience? And then I talk about growing edges. So I have growing edges in terms of my emotionality, in terms of my intuition, all of them. Yeah. And so what we do in life streams is to first look at what's your primary experience. You have told me that your primary experience is thinking. So we would play in that field and, okay, let's take your mind and put it out here and take a look at thinking. Dev's thinking, and how does that work for him? And, looking at that and then getting a clear sense of that, maybe even acting out you as a thinker. What would the thinker say? What was his statement be? Or what would his posture be? The thinker, and just let yourself start to open up and embody the thinkingness. So I did the thinker thing, the picture of the thinker. I've just gone into sensation, and I might say, well, I think this, and I think this. And then I've started bringing in emotionality in that I'm using expression with the thinking. And then I could say, what are my intuitions about God, and bring in some bigger, more metaphysical picture.
Well, what I like about the process you just described is that with the thinking, it immediately puts it in a box to observe. And that's usually the biggest challenge when you are not, I think, therefore I am. You're not that I am thinking anymore. You're now observing a thinking.
Exactly.
Which can then be the starting point for these forays into the streams.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, just to mention, we have a fifth stream sitting out there, and that's our environment and our interaction with the environment. So that's also having an incredible impact on us.
Like a meta stream almost.
Yeah. Or we can also see it as our full reality. So I sit here in my room. I mean, I was talking to someone the other week, and they were feeling very anxious and talking about, they had a thing where they had to go into court. So I'm so anxious. What's going to happen? And they were into a negative thought loop about the future. They can't possibly know what's going to happen, but that mental thing kept going on. So what we did was we sat here and I said, okay, just stop. And I have this mantra, stop, look, listen, and reflect. Stop and look around you. What's happening in this environment? And the person looked around them and they said, well, I hear the birds outside and my cat's laying over there. And okay, so we did that. We got connected into the physical reality. All of a sudden, it was impossible for this person to do the anxiety game anymore because they were getting here. Back to my basic comment, this is it, man. This is our reality. You're going to leave our talk. I'm going to leave our talk. But we don't have any idea what's going to go on. We have fantasies about what's going to happen. I have a fantasy about eating some food afterwards. I probably will do that. But something could happen and, we could have another earthquake. We had an earthquake a while back and I was sitting in my room doing something and all of a sudden that was not appropriate and I needed to leave the building.
Reality was your fifth stream was shaking.
Yes, shake and bake. Yeah.
So you just talked about the intellect and bringing it out and to observe it. How do you walk through people to feel into that full spectrum of emotion? Especially when there's blocks and sometimes with emotions, it's like, the mind takes over and says like, okay, I want to do it. And like, I want the sadness. The emotions have to be felt in a very organic sense. How do you work through that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll talk about thinking. I use the image of a swimming pool with a diving board. So thinking is standing up on the diving board and looking at the pool. You can see it, you can understand it. It's a great place for understanding. and you can gauge, what's going on, but you're not in the water, okay? So you can use your thinking as a way of preparing yourself to go into the water. Well, let's take anger. We're sitting here talking, and I say, well, Dev, as a human being, you have anger inside of you. That's part of your process. Does that resonate with you? Do you believe that to be true?
I think so. I think there is
Great.
certainly anger.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. So you're up on the diving board right now.
Yeah.
So here we are up on the diving board, Well, what do you think about that anger? If you look at it, let's just, there's Dev's anger. What do you think about it? Have any ideas, thoughts about it?
Seems to be that it doesn't like to show itself, not directly. Likes to maybe wear some costumes or play behind the curtains as a sort of backseat driver.
Great. Okay. So you've taken and you've started analyzing your anger and the position that it has. So that would be a whole way that we could move into it. Just analyzation, more analyzation, until you get a real clear picture of it for your intellect. As you do that, what you're doing is you're programming a new way of relating to your anger. You haven't jumped into the experience of it, but you've started organizing it in a different way intellectually. Then we could take it another step, and we could say, well, if your anger was sitting out in front of you, what would you have to say to it?
Stop hiding.
Yeah.
Stop acting like you're not there.
Okay.
And stop placing judgments that you're bad or that you don't deserve to be treated just like the other emotions.
Perfect. Okay. So notice that as you were talking to your anger, you also change your emotionality, your energy, your feelings. Stop that. Stop it. There was we could call it the judgment was coming up about it. And also what I noticed from here was there was an invitation underneath it. I want you out in the open more. So this would be over time. I mean, we're sitting here for a few minutes, so this process doesn't happen overnight. I'm still working with it, and I've been doing this for 84 years. It's a whole lifetime game.
Life streams, after all.
Exactly, yeah. But this is the way. These are ways of starting to consider your whole life, and it's here and now. Now, another part of the game that's interesting is that our programming keeps us away from the here and now. It keeps us into the there and then. So I'm William, and I'm a psychologist, and I'm a musician, and blah, blah, blah. I put on my little ego cap. What is that I've done? I've given you a historical definition of who I am. Well, those things are all true. But as I sit here in the here and now, I'm William talking with Dev. I'm not all those fantasies of the past. Now, I like to call that our historical self-image. Some people call it the ego. I use historical self-image because that feels like an energizing way of looking at it. I also talk about putting my ego cap on, which is that image. So I go out into the world and I present myself. Now, I'm presenting myself in a particular way to you in this moment. If you were my wife, then we'd be having a very different conversation. And the stream would be shifting a little bit. My heart probably would be opening up a little bit more, maybe my fear, depending on what's happening. So it's all of this shifting and changing going on all the time. So we just did a little we could call that a mini session.
Yeah.
One of the ways that I work is that I have people imagine things sitting in front of them. So I use a pillow, and I say, this is from one of the therapeutic techniques or one of the schools that I learned from, which was Gestalt therapy. And what they do is they have you get into the moment. So we wouldn't talk about your mom or talk about we would put it on the pillow in front of you. So you'd speak to mom, or you just spoke to your anger, come out, Then we would get you into your sense of yourself in that experience. We might take it into the different streams. That would be one direction to take it. But we could also take it into this conversation with your anger. And the more that you talk to it, and the more that you get a sense of your relationship, Dev's relationship to it, the more you're expanding. Then what we can do, which is the next step, is reverse roles and see what your anger would have to say back to you. And that then becomes a whole part of the system. Then there's the communication between you and your anger. And all the time, what you're doing is integrating more and more of your wholeness. I mean, this is the funny paradox that we live. I mean, here we are, whole people. You know, you're not a partial Dev, you're the whole guy. I'm the whole William, which means everything is here, all of it right here and now. Yeah. And if we look at that on a spiritual level, the Buddha said, wonder of wonder, all beings are the Buddha. Underneath the core, the very core of the human experience is Buddhahood. And then there's all these streams and memories and karma that were keeping us away from this here and now present experience of enlightenment. It's like I was with Osho, I mentioned to you. And one of the things Osho said when I was there that just blew my mind, you know, there's many of us sitting around and he's answering questions. And he just stopped for a minute and he looked around and he had kind of a Cheshire cat grin that he would do. And he said, you know, I'm curious, how do you people pretend that you're not enlightened? How do you do that? And that just blew my head off at that point. He's like, that's he's saying, you know, he just reversed the role. And how do we do that? I've taken it outside of the enlightenment game, although we can do that, into the here and now embodiment game. How do I pretend that I'm not a whole person? And that's what the whole game is about, the streams. I identify with my intellect, is what you're saying. Well, okay, we don't want to get rid of that. We want to see if we can refine it and make it as complete and as whole as possible, and then start looking at the interactions of the other three streams that are just kind of sitting there, along with your enlightenment, waiting to be embodied and experienced.
Yeah. Ooh. I'm just going to let that settle in for a few moments. Everything is right here, right now. And, I mean, I'm thinking of how you described this experience right from the start. We talked about, you know, diver being on the diving board and, you know, not experiencing the pool just yet. And the image that came to me, that's come to me in the past often, and particularly in relation to my journey of seeing the whole Dave, you know, seeing this integrated me and starting to have this relationship, is I often felt that the intellect was like, if I'm preparing to run a marathon, you know, I need to eat the right food the night before.
Sure.
I need to buy the right shoes. You know, there's a whole list of things for me to be the best marathon runner I need to be.
Right.
And the intellect has been great at that.
Yeah,
you know,
it's
find
wonderful.
The right books, and it's like you'll create the discipline, and it will like really create the logical structure for where you would structure your day and how you do all these things. But then at some point, you're like, there is no runner. There is no race. And as Osho said, how are you pretending to be, you know, if I paraphrase, how can you pretend to be running a race and trying to get anywhere when you are already there? And that's what breaks the mind almost, being like, what do you mean?
Yeah. Well, you know, this is what we're confronted with as human beings. Let's take it in a more simple way. I get an 8-ounce glass. I put 4 ounces of water in it. Is that glass half full or is it half empty? We live with that all the time.
Yeah.
The thing that I've been particularly aware of at this age, I'm in the last chapter. It's not like you have probably, hopefully, you have a few chapters left. I don't. This is the last chapter. A few months ago, I had a stroke and I ended up in the ICU for a few days. And I'm laying there with tubes in me, and the people around me are all laying around with tubes in them, and they're dying. And it's like, holy shit, this is it. I'm dying. And I've had that experience in different ways a few times, but this was the one that's most most present in my experience now. And what I recognized is something that one of my Buddhist teachers said at the beginning of a retreat. He said, the first breath of this life is the beginning of your death. And if you live your life with that awareness, you will live fully and completely. And you and I have been programmed to believe, I'm going to die someday. Out there, I'm going to die, rather than I'm dying. And, I say that to people, and people say, oh, so sad. That's too bad, William. Hey, man, you're dying too. Wake up to this thing. If I had the experience at 30 that I have now, I would probably have lived a much fuller life these last few years. Because it's like that programming of future orientation keeps us out of the present. And what happens to people, this is an interesting one, and you may find this true for your own life as you age. You reach a place, kind of a plateau, where you can't really see a lot of future plans. Now, obsessive people will future plan until they croak, but people who are less obsessive start reflecting, and then they go back into the good old days. And, it's like I'll talk to my brother, or I have two friends that are older than me, and we'll talk, and every once in a while we jump back into the good old days, And that's what many people do. They either keep pushing to get better and better and get more and more, progress, or they go into I remember when. But that's all happening now. So I'm having a memory now.
Yeah. So, William, since you just referenced the many chapters that you've had, take me back a little bit to how you, perhaps initially as a musician, as a psychologist, how did you start to open up these four streams? I'm very curious about your experience as a musician, especially, because we were talking about it in this context of emotional states, right? You mentioned about how everyone in the scene was like, that feels good. And blues itself, the name blues, it's connected to an emotion, right? I feel the blues.
Yeah.
Yeah, how did that experience as a musician, particularly a blues musician, start to open it up for you, particularly maybe the emotional stream or others?
Well, I think I mentioned to you earlier, music has been the foremost aspect of my life. I'm an auditory person. My first memories are of music in the crib. I remember the music being played. And I've always been highly emotionally affected by music. I remember as a little kid, maybe 3, they had march music every Saturday morning for a half an hour. And I would play that march music and march around the room. And I remember when I was 4, hearing gospel music and feeling a tactile feeling in my heart. So I have a very great sensitivity to music. Loneliness and sadness have been in my life for quite some time. I was the first of 4 children. I had about 4 years of being the little prince, and then 3 children came immediately after me. And that pushed me out into that nice connection with mom and being the chosen one out into the world. And it was a shock to me. I was pretty connected up with my mom, and she was a pianist. So we had that deep mother-son relationship, but there was also this incredible music thing. And she took me to hear music when I was younger. So when that all changed and she was busy with the other kids, I became lonely, and music became kind of the thing that became my companion. And I heard rhythm and blues probably in the 5th or 6th grade, and the intensity and the power and the sensuality of it, this was it. I loved it, And there was a guy, his named Happy Harold, who was a DJ, and he had a rhythm and blues program that was aired a ways from my house. And I would ride my bicycle on Saturdays and go and just sit as he played and listen to this music. And then the summer of the 6th grade, I talked my parents into letting me go to a live, it was actually a dance, but it was B.B. King. the famous blues. Now, this was in the mid-50s, and it was, and he had a big band with him. And, there were several hundred people there. It was like for the black community, essentially. I don't know that there were any white people besides myself there. I don't remember. It was interesting because the racial situation was such that Latinos and blacks had more contact together. So I remember some Latino people being there. But I went there, and there was B.B. King. They started, and they would play a warm-up song, an instrumental, before B.B. would come on and do his thing. And it was a blues jazz tune. And everybody soloed, and the baritone saxophone player was a bebop player. He played bebop jazz. And he just blew my mind. I mean, I hadn't heard anything like that, and it just totally ruined me for the rest of my life. I mean, that was it. That was the end of the game. And from that time, I was just, a fanboy, I guess you'd call them now. And when I started playing, I had a feeling for the music, and I was accepted into that community. I was sort of the funny, skinny little white boy that played the saxophone. And I was actually shepherded through that environment, because that could be a very heavy environment. There would be violence there sometimes. Anyway, so that opened me up to those feeling states. And then one night when I was about 20, I was playing in a band in this little club. You'd go into the club, and the bandstand was to the right of the door. It was not a big club. And it was up a little bit. It was held up a little bit. And then there was a dance floor. And then in back of that were tables and a bar. We're playing along, and we were doing an instrumental tune, so I had a solo in it. And I started to solo, and there was an incredibly tingling feeling in my hands. I put my hands on the saxophone, started playing, and it was as if my hands and the saxophone merged, and I could feel the whole experience of being me and the saxophone at the same time. And that just kept moving deeper and deeper, and I fell into the sound. And I was no longer me or the saxophone. I was the sound, me and the saxophone. And that just kept merging into the dancers, and my consciousness became enveloped in the dancers, and then the whole room. And this was a totally clear experience. I mean, it was one of the realest experiences I've ever had. And I was the room. So we finished, and I was just totally blown away. And I went up to the band leader, who was about a 55-year-old guitar player, and I said, "Hey, what happened?" He said, "What do you mean?" And I said, when we kind of melted into our instruments and do that. And he's looking at me like this, and it's like getting this smile on his face, I got through, and I could see that he was just almost laughing, And then he just said one thing: "Boy, what have you been smoking?" And I didn't know about that yet. But, that just changed my whole life. It was like, I'm not William, I'm William plus. And then I started looking into psychology and hypnosis and spirituality to find out, who am I? Because now the I that I had been programmed as, this William, was no longer viable. It's just a partial program. It's sort of, we've been talking about your identification with your mind, with all these other programs running. That was what happened to me in terms of Williamness.
Wow. Direct experience.
Yeah.
And music, music, arts, like these are the kinds of activities that really gets us out of that personality in a way. Certainly, since we talked about live streams and we talk about the first one, which is like getting into the body. Again, it's like this interesting cycle where you both get into the body to feel, but then that experience eventually leads you to see even that body itself isn't quite what you thought it was.
No.
And that's like another interesting sort of journey. In your bio, I did a readout, and you said you were a psychedelic elder. And, you just mentioned the 50s. So you had this experience as a musician, you said you were then looking to be you looked into hypnosis and being into psychotherapy. What was the next chapter then? Yeah, tell us a little
Well,
bit more.
yeah, I was still a musician. This was early 60s. I was playing in a rhythm and blues band it was a show band, so we had dancers and singers and things in Las Vegas. And I had found out, I'd read about Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, and I had joined, they had an organization called the International Federation for Internal Freedom, IFIF. So I became a member, and I was very interested in it. There was Huxley's Doors of Perception. I found that book, and it was like, wow, this sounds like some real interesting stuff. And at some point, somebody came through Las Vegas with some acid, and a friend of mine, another musician, said, hey, I have some LSD. Would you like to try it? And I said, sure. By that time, I had gotten involved in sort of the framework that Leary and Alpert had, and they had a book called The Psychedelic Experience that they put out. And it was a psychedelic take on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So I had that, and I had, I got my bells and beads and everything, and I had my altar, and I was going to take I had a little thing to hold the acid in, and I took it and was preparing to go into death and rebirth, and I started tripping, and the guy that gave me the acid knocked on my door. I get up, I'm totally stoned. He said, hey, come on. And he took me in his car and drove me down the Las Vegas Strip, which is just neon. He had some stuff that he needed to do. And it took me into psychedelic Las Vegas.
So you're tripping, going through Las Vegas.
Las Vegas, in a car, yeah. Which was an absolute trip. It was, as far as the external, the fifth stream was just streaming. Anyway, I got back and came down and reflected on what had happened, and I realized that particularly after coming down, the parallel between my experience in music and part of the psychedelic experience, it was clear that it was the same ball game. And not too long later, I quit the band and went to San Francisco and joined a psychedelic rock band. So in 67, the Summer of Love, I was a member of a psychedelic rock band in San Francisco.
What's that like?
Well, we were awfully high a lot of the time. It was amazing because it was like there was this small little contingent of people. There were several thousand young people who had come to the Haight-Ashbury, which is where it was all happening. And you'd drop acid and go out into the street. And you'd walk down the street and you'd see someone, and it was clear that they were in that psychedelic unity together. And there was a sense, a unification sense. There was a thing called the Gathering of the Tribes in Golden Gate Park that I went to. And Tim Leary and Allen Ginsberg and Eldridge Cleaver and the Grateful Dead. It was like, I think they said 18,000 people. And Osley, who was the guy that created a lot of the acid, was giving out free acid. So here are probably 17,000 of the 18,000 totally stoned on acid. And the unity of that, it was like we were one. And that was not an intellectual experience. That was a tactile experience. And it was like, well, all we have to do is just give everybody acid and we can have peace on earth. And it felt that way. That was the feeling experience of it. And of course, it was very naive. And by the time the end of the summer was gone, it was a battle zone. The bikers from Oakland came in and started selling speed. And that just started ruining the whole thing. A lot of the people that were the true believers left and went and formed communes. That was when communes started. Actually, the band I was in, we had a house, which was kind of far out. And the Grateful Dead and Airplane, they all had their houses. They lived together, and you'd play music all the time. So, yeah, I had that experience of unity. And then it disappeared. And it disappeared in a very horrible way. It was like young kids still trying to come to San Francisco for the Summer of Love, and the winter of depression was now there. And that was when I started getting into psychology. There was a place called the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, and then another place called Fort Help. And I ended up working at Fort Help as I became a psychologist. It was like an alternative clinic, and it was initially set up to help the street kids and, the acid burnout people to get their act together.
I'm curious about what you just described, the summer of love and the winter of depression. Like, in some sense, you described this experience of unity, 17,000 people experiencing this, this extremely heightened, elevated state of consciousness. Was it that you and Timothy Leary and, this group you guys were pioneers in a way of this new movement? Yeah. Was it a lack of awareness of, let's just say, what goes up, what comes down, like the sort of the fact that what you were experiencing wasn't it? Like what we know today, when I think the discourse around, psychedelics and its role, but back then you guys were discovering this, for the first time. Like what do you think was missing from the understanding of what psychedelics meant in relation to experiencing consciousness and this journey of feeling the unity that you felt as a musician? Yeah.
Well, one of the things I think is important to recognize is that Leary and Alpert and Metzner all were totally brilliant. I mean, these are Harvard psychologists. I mean, they're the cream of the crop intellectually, and their level of understanding and maturity is incredibly great. So when they had the experience, they went into that deep spiritual aspect of psychedelics. Ram Dass, actually, there's a YouTube that's beautiful. He talks about his mushroom experience and how that opened the door to spirituality and eventually sent him off to India. And so the unity and the openness was just opening up to one of those places that's inside all the time. I mean, that unity is here with us now. We may not be fully experiencing it, but it's part, and that's the thing for me that's so important to recognize, that we're whole people. We're the whole thing. And the unity, all of it is there. To open up that door, we also have to accept the shadow. And the fact I talked about my rage, that's part of who I am. If I deny that, I give it energy. So I have to accept it. And with Life Streams, what I'm trying to do is help people integrate it in a way where it doesn't hold. I mean, you look at what's happening in the world today, there's so much tension and frustration, and people are holding it back, and then it explodes. Gaza and Myanmar and Congo, and I mean the explosion of this rage that we have as a species, and we can see it. And if we see it over there, those people are crazy, and we need to fix the world, and we'll fix the world, then we're bullshitting, And the New Age movement, which I was deeply involved in, is a partial movement. And if you don't acknowledge, and I'm not talking about acting out, if you don't acknowledge that each of us has the saint and the sinner inside of us, each of us is a killer. And that's a hard one to try on for me. Yeah. But it's true. Yeah. So that was one of the things that was missing with the psychedelic thing. We got into that incredible, expansive place, and we didn't recognize that all around us was the darkness. And it just came and ate us. And, it's like the second psychedelic revolution. I have some real paradoxical thoughts about it. Yeah. Psychedelics are now a medicine, and let's heal everybody. Let's heal the world.
Healing in a pill. Yeah.
Or just the idea of healing. It's like, I love the Taoists. And one of the things that just strikes me very strongly personally is what in the Tao Te Ching it says, if I assert good, I imply evil. If I assert good, I imply bad. The yin and the yang did not exist apart from each other. And in the West, one of the things that's created the insanity is good fighting against evil and triumphing against evil so everything can be good. sorry, but that just doesn't fit with my experience. There are people that may believe that and live like that, but that ain't where I've been.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's really nice to hear that story, of that lived experience, almost that experiment at a particular moment in time, which has then led to so many openings, including your own, because then you started to explore but this more scientifically or intentionally as a psychologist. And then your journey into spirituality started in a more direct way.
Yeah.
Walk me through that next chapter then.
Well, I actually started doing TM in the 60s.
Traditional medicine.
No, that's one of the TMs. The other one is Transcendental meditation. That was the Beatles, and it's a mantra, actually a mantra meditation. And I did that for about 3.5 years, and it was wonderful. And I have friends that still do it. And for some reason, that kind of fell away, and I found Tai Chi. And that's when I became a Tai Chi maniac. I was doing like 3 classes a day sometimes. It was like I was so disembodied, that when I finally got a sense of being this energy system, it was I just went for it and did it for a long time. And that then I did for many years, and I probably overdid it. I became too identified with it. And actually that happened to me with music too. It's like when I was 28, I stopped playing music, and I went through a depression and a very difficult time of trying to figure out who I was, because I was William the musician, from 15 to 28. That was 24 hours a day, and having that opening. And actually, that's one of the things that's starting to happen now. And COVID was an incredible way of starting to ring the bell to hopefully help people wake up and realize that this ego cap, this everyday William that walks around, is just part of what's going on. And now, with this incredible shift and change, particularly through the various, AI particularly, but that's just expanding. That's going to shift who we are. Well, it already has. And the young people are suffering from it, and they don't even realize it.
Okay, well, you mentioned AI. I knew we were going to get there. But now that you mentioned it, tell me more. I mean, your lives have spanned so many different technology paradigms. You remember the good old days.
Yeah.
When, there were none of these devices in our pockets. So maybe you had different things in your pockets, just not phones.
Yeah.
Tell me more about what you just said about AI and how you see its impact on our minds and state of reality.
Yeah. Let me go back and start. When I was a teenager, I read Brave New World in 1984, and they had an incredibly deep impact on me. And I was already an outsider. I've been outside of kind of the social system. I mentioned, Canadian parents and American bring up. There was already a split in terms of my social reality, so I'm sitting on the outside. I read those 2 books, and I had an intuition. I said, my God, this is already happening. This is not about the future. And as I've watched since that time, we're just naturally evolving through this materialistic paradigm, which is underlying it. And we went through the 50s and into the 60s. And the interesting thing about technology is that technology, particularly computers, was fueled by psychedelics. And I remember going down to score acid with we called them freak friends. And we went into the house to score, and we're sitting there waiting for the guy to get it together. And these 3 guys walked. Well, they had to, put the pills in. These 3 guys came in, and they had crew cuts, horn-rimmed glasses, white short-sleeve shirts with the little plastic thing to hold your pens so they didn't leak. And they were you would call them geeks, I guess. No, they're nerds now. And they were from UC Berkeley, and they were computer guys, and they were dropping acid. We were dropping acid and playing music and dancing, and they were dropping acid and talking about quantum physics and shit, And that's where that's where the computer revolution started. So there's this whole psychedelic underlying of all of culture, and so gradually we had the first revolution, then the government shut it all down for a long time, which was a tragedy because we lost like 30 years of study. There was a lot of study in the late 50s and early 60s, a lot of very serious scholarly study on psychedelics. And now that's happening again, of course. Where did I go?
You're talking about the connection to the psychedelics, to the, let's say, the birth of modern digital technologies.
Yeah.
And why you felt AI was problematic.
Yeah. Okay, so what we could say is that going back to I think, therefore I am. Now, if we look at psychology, there's different frameworks we can use. We can say there's like kind of a mid-range, and then there's looser and looser identity, more flexibility in a person. When they get to the extreme flexibility, we're talking about someone who can't function, someone that's psychotic or hysterical, that just is there and can't get it together to function in the world. If we go in the other direction into more form and more formulation, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter till we get to that neurotic situation, which is obsessive compulsive. So these are the control freaks. And what's happened is those people have become sort of the heroes of this era, the era of technology. And it's real interesting in that many of the people that work in tech are on the autism spectrum. And we all have, I'm on the spectrum. I'm not really far on the spectrum. But what's interesting is the thing that happens with some autistic people is they become brilliant, and they have genius quality thinking process, but they're disconnected socially. And autistic people have difficulty making eye contact. It's like that starts moving them down into the streams that they're disidentified with. They're totally identified with, I think, therefore I am. And, it's like you look at some of the brilliant people. Musk is definitely on the stream. Zuckerberg. We could talk about these people that are the heroes. Yeah. Sam Altman, he's got some of it. And they're brilliant, they're wonderful, but they don't have that sense of connection into the social world. And technology is moving so fast. The sociologists used to say it takes about 2 generations for the populace to catch up with the technologies. And now the technologies are moving so fast that we can't catch up with them. Grok 4 just came out. Hey, man, Grok 4. So I go outside. I live in a small Thai area with fairly poor people. Grok 4? What are you talking about? AI? Oh, yeah, technology. Not connected with that at all. And their lives are unconnected. Yet this tsunami of information and technology is coming, and it's starting to get here. I read a paper in 2011, I think it was by the Rand Corporation, that said they figured about 56% of jobs would be lost in the next decade through technology. And we can see it. It's certainly happening. I go up to my wife's village, and they no longer plant the rice, which used to be a job for a lot of people. Now a car comes in and plants the rice in a day. Well, what happened to those people? Where are they?
I'm really interested in this connection between this, what you just mentioned around just this like deluge of information that's coming, and the spectrum. Because when we started the conversation, we talked about the third stream, which is the intellect. And it feels to me that AI is primarily directed at this intellect, right?
Yes.
That, like Steve Jobs used to say, a computer is a bicycle for the mind.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing that being like, I love it. Let me get on my bicycle.
Yeah.
But like AI is now this Formula One car, forget a bicycle. And so we're already dealing with a world and, ourselves. I can speak for myself where like my mind and my intellect is already, imbalanced and
Yeah.
running too fast. And then this world around me and, the fifth stream, AI is just taking that and running it even faster.
Yes, yes. And the scary thing that's happening underneath it with the chat bots, I mean, this is a relatively new phenomenon. People are identifying these bots as human beings. And we have a projective mechanism where we can project, my cat. I give my cat a personality and blah, blah, blah. That's coming from our mind projecting. And what's happening is people are projecting on these bots. These bots are smarter than us. It's like Grok knows everything. It's amazing. But what's happening for a lot of people is they're starting to emotionally interact. And I saw this thing about AI religion. Where these people are starting to, because the AI has all this stuff. It's got all Buddhism and Hinduism, Sufism, Christianity. It's got all of it in there. So you start asking questions about God, and it says, well, here's God. This is what it is. And people are now giving up their sense of identity and projecting onto the chatbots, which in a way is what was happening in the Middle Ages, where people projected on a God out there and started losing when the Enlightenment happened, started losing that connection with themselves, and it started moving the energy up into the idea of God.
Yeah, and I mean, if we've grown up in a culture where we worshipped the intellect, right? Like, as you mentioned, the Elon Musks and the Sam Altmans are the heroes of our culture. Then naturally, the AI systems that are so intelligent, I use quotation marks here because, it's only showing a slice of intelligence.
Yeah.
But it's so fast at computing extremely advanced things that our minds are not capable of, that we think that's what God must be like.
Right.
Like,
well, this is the, what would you call him? The God of power and control. I think of it as the Christians talk about the Antichrist coming back, and it's almost like that's what it is. Power is heaven, rather than softness and gentleness and moving deep into a unity. The unity through power and control and domination, rather than the unity through love. And this is one of the reasons why I'm doing live streams. I'm watching people dissociate from the streams and becoming associated through the intellect and through the imaging to the outside world. There was a guy in the East named David Reisman. He was a sociologist. And at that time, he talked about inner and other directed behaviors. And inner behaviors were ones where I dealt with the fifth stream, but I did it from a place of unity inside, so that my motivation was coming from my life experience. Outer direction was where I'm identifying with the outside world and using that value system and that identity as who I am. And that's totally what's happened to the culture. We're all trapped in it.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I can see my mind already sort of trying to think about the future.
Yeah.
And bringing it back to the here and now. And I mean, my intention with doing the podcast itself, partly for me in my own journey, but partly to also share, these kinds of views, because if this is the kind of world that is shaping up, we need some tools, we need some assistance from different ways, we need some wisdom. And maybe this is getting at a question, which is, you've lived through different realities, different times where, there were just maybe a different consciousness. Like the quality of the minds were different. There would be less of that speediness that we see now, or less of this like hyper fast minds that we're talking about now, which are, influenced by our culture and technology. So much of the wisdom traditions that, we talked about Buddhism and Taoism, and the, maybe others that you've explored more deeply, which are teachings from a time when we didn't have any of this.
Yeah.
now in this world today, I still find a lot of depth and value from these teachings. But then I feel like there's going to be some need to remix and reinvent this for the modern mind. Like, I think I was talking to my teacher about this just the other day, and he mentioned how the modern ego is just very coddled, very spoiled.
Yeah.
Like in the past, you met one teacher, and there was no YouTube, there was none of that, you know. So you met a teacher, and he was great, and like that was it. You just went into service,
Yeah.
and it was easy. In a sense, it was easy, and I don't mean to say it was easy, but you didn't go to YouTube and you see 20 other,
Right.
YouTube accounts telling you
Right.
20 other perspectives. And so today we're so coddled and spoiled. Yeah, how do you see this transition and this change, and how do you see how we use the practices and the wisdoms that were maybe created at a time when the quality of our minds and consciousness were different in our lives today?
Yeah. Well, just as an aside, the Buddha really formulated this very clearly. We have delusion, we have hatred, greed, and delusion. And as they manifest more and more, we get more disconnected from our wholeness. Yeah, I don't have a picture of the future at all. I used to do that, kind of a philosophy game. And I actually belonged to a magazine called The Futurist. I was very interested in what's going to happen. And I talked earlier about that experience with Brave New World in 1984. I've been looking at that. And now I'm not dealing with the future at all. It's not that I'm hiding from it, but I'm recognizing that what I do in this moment and my awareness will carry me into whatever future's going to be there. We look at the outside world, and depending on who you want to talk to, it's either going to hell in a handbasket or we're on the cusp of abundance. We're back to the glass half empty, half full thing.
Mm.
For me, it has to do with recognizing and embodying here and now. It's funny because Ram Dass wrote a book called Be Here Now, and one of the famous spiritual books of a few years ago was The Power of Now.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. And the thing about it is, here we are in the now. We can't not be in the now. We're just in the now in different ways. And that's why I'm developed the streams, so we can stand back and ask ourselves that primary question, who am I? And then I start looking at, I'm this thinking process, and then something happens, and then I'm a feeling process. And as I integrate that, there's a place, an experience where the four streams come together. And it's not enlightenment, spiritual style, peak awareness. I guess you could call it a peak experience. And actually, I look back on it, that's how this started. I was working with a friend who was having some trouble. And I hadn't been doing therapy for years, and I've been doing all these spiritual practices. And I realized that therapy is wonderful as far as it goes, but it just doesn't go far enough. And so as we worked for about a year and a half together, and one day we were talking about these four things, and he got it, and he experienced the four streams together, and it was a unifying experience for him. And he said, now I know who I am here and now. Now, that doesn't take you into nirvana or into the deep altered states. It takes you here and now. And if you want to go into those states, you just decide, I'm going to spend time in my intuition. It's like I reached a place several years ago, just not having anything left to do in the outside world. I've done it all. It's finished. So I went down south to Wat, and I stayed there for a couple of months. That was what I needed to do at that time. When I went in, my intention was just putting on robes, and that would be the end of my life. That didn't happen that way. And here I am out here doing this. I valued that experience, and it's part of who I am, but I'm not a monk. I'm not a Buddhist. And that was one of the wonderful things about Osho. Osho talked about Zorba the Buddha. And to me, that's just absolute brilliance. Zorba goes out into the world and fully experiences the world, not as a lustful, holding, greedy person, but just an open heart. And The Buddha sits in awareness. And Osho talked about he talked about two streams too, two streams to enlightenment. The stream of awareness, the Buddhist tradition, the stream of love, Bhakti Yoga, the Christians, the Sufis. And here are these two streams that somewhere, I guess, meet together. But I just found him, out of all the teachers, being able to talk about both worlds and not separate them.
That's beautiful. We have each of us, I mean, you talked about the four streams, and each of us have our own little unique mix, and identifying the ones that are strongest for us, and then leading from there, and then recognizing our wholeness. What I hear in your life as well, you've experienced so many different things, been through different chapters, and you've kind of used your journey itself has become one of teaching and learning. It wasn't about becoming a monk at any point or withdrawing from life. It was using what life was bringing up for you, integrating that into your own insight about who you are and how you relate to the world.
Yeah, I tried. I was in the monastery for a couple of months with the intention of taking on the robes, and I realized that wasn't me. That was part of me, and that's when I came out, and I've ended up married and living in Bangkok.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I'm interested about that because I met you in Bangkok, in like the heart of Sukhumvit. When I heard about you and when we had spoken before, you would think that at your current chapter in life, you would, want to be in under a tree, far away from, this crazy modern civilization that we have, and just enjoying the peace and tranquility of nature. But you're holding your peace with you in the heart of one of the most chaotic and bustling cities in the world. How do you do it?
Well,
and how does it? Yeah, what attracts you at this stage of your life to be there? Just curious.
Yeah, the recognition that I'm a whole person, and I sit. I mean, I'm a meditator. I sit a couple of times a day. But what holds me here actually is this and this. So I'm still. I mean, this is probably one of the most incredible gifts that I've been given. I'm still playing music. I have a jazz jam session I run every Sunday here in Bangkok. And, that's just amazing. I mean, the idea that I'm still able to play music. My guess is it'll probably end this year. I had the stroke and I'm dying. I mean, that's really clear. I may make it through this year. I may not. It's not like I'm dying that way, but I'm slowly going out. And
how does that feel?
It's interesting. It's just interesting. And the reason it's interesting is because I'm dying, just period. I mean, it's not a big deal because I can say the other side of the coin is I'm living. That's the glass again. And that was the beauty of having that monk tell me that the beginning of this life is also the beginning of the death. So if I'm here, and this was Osho too, celebrate everything. Be here now. This is it, man. You don't have another it. And whatever you're doing is what you're doing. It's like at midnight, this day is gone. We don't get it again. That's it. 12 hours and 20 minutes left in this day. And, we can do this and go along, and we do. I mean, that's what the ego does. It creates the smaller William. But when I recognize that, then I can go, hey, wow, there's Dev, far out, It's nice out today. Wow. I can take in a breath, touch my heart. I can call my wife. I can, here I am. This is life. And this is all of it. All the rest of it is fantasy from the past, fantasy about the future, and memory from the past. It's not that that's wrong, and they come up. It's not like, oh, now I'm whole all the time. I'm not. I'm moving back and forth. And that's the life streams. If I wanted peace and quiet, if I wanted enlightenment, I'd be in the temple. I'd be sitting 18 hours a day because that's the way I know to get it. I mean, the psychedelics certainly gave me a touch of some of those experiences, and I feel incredibly grateful for that. And, my experience of mescaline particularly was just awe-inspiring. Somebody was to say you could stay high on mescaline for the rest of your life. Okay, because I wasn't out of it. My being was here, my perception was here, my feelings were here, but they were magnified. I'm just hoping that somebody comes along, with some substance that gives you that, because most of them don't. They either give you too little or too much.
You mentioned you have a wife. How has having a relationship with another person in this intimate way shaped your journey? How has it helped you learn, just know yourself better and relate?
Yeah. At this point, my wife is back in her village. We have a little...
In Isan and
in
Northeast
Isan,
Thailand.
yeah. She doesn't like Bangkok at all. I met her here and she was working here, but like so many people, what was it? Bangkok is a pimple on the butt of Thailand. And a lot, the people come here to work, but they want to go home. And the identity, the cultural identity of Thais, both with the family and then with Thainess, with the king, and with Buddhism, create a solidity that you can feel. It's only those Thais that have gotten too involved with Westerners that are doing the depression anxiety thing. So my wife is up there. We lived together we've been married 20 years. So we lived together for some time down here. And then her mom got ill. So she went up to take care of her mom. And over time, she realized that she wants to live there. She doesn't want to live here. And, it's like she's old enough where the idea of being married is not a big deal or anything. And we did our work together. And one of the ways of looking at a couple, there's different frames you can put around it. I do couples work too.
I often think of the quote from Ramdas, the yoga of relationship.
Yeah.
If it can be.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It certainly can be. But I think of my wife as my teacher, and that's not the only thing that she is, but for my own growth, she is who I need to sit in front of and bow down to. And my wife is extremely open-hearted. She's just this living heart, and that's what she's teaching me. Gradually I opened it a little bit more, is it okay? Okay, maybe a little bit more. And she has been my primary therapist along with the Thai people. And one of the things that I tell people is I live in a country of therapists. And people say, oh, what do you mean? And I say, I'm talking to Thai people all the time. And every once in a while, somebody says, William, you think too much. And that's my therapy session. It's like, thank you. Let me get some of that energy down into the rest of myself.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. It's beautiful that you have a wife that has this open heart. And when you said that about like how she has this open heart and you're like inching up, opening up a little bit more. A lot of me was laughing as well inside because it often feels like that for me in relationships as well, where, you're like doing a little bit more and my partner is just very open, and it's like, that's something to learn from and something to open up more, especially that emotional state, because I feel like we're so put together, so like a vine around the stick of meanness, and that like I need to have this journey that will be perfect, and I need to just always be in the right space at the right time, and everything needs to be about me. And it's just that's that whole, so everything's just rooted in this false
right. Well, if you can see that as programming, this is how you've been programmed, and if you can step away from judgment about it and recognize you're a genius. You have done everything in your life that you have needed to do in order to keep integrity. You've had experiences, probably some traumatic experiences that were incredibly painful that you've needed to hold and push down. And in order to do that, you needed to go up in your head. I had birth trauma, from what I understand. So my trauma started right in the beginning. And in learning about pre and postnatal psychology, what they say is when a baby goes through birth trauma, they have to contract the body to get the energy up into the head, into the brain to keep alive. And, there's different kinds of, the somatically oriented therapies really speak directly to that. And as a result of that, it's like I can feel how that was necessary. It was necessary for me to do that in order to survive. The way that is manifested in terms of relationship and being in the world, there's some of it's neurotic, some of it's not neurotic, but those are just levels of what I've needed to do. If I work with myself from a non-judgmental place, I just accept, okay, here I am. I'm here in my wholeness. I have a certain amount of it that's directly experienceable, and some of it isn't. That's my growing edges. So I get out of the psychologizing of it. The reason I left psychology is because it's circular. It goes around forever and ever. You work with your father, you work with your mother, you work with this, and you're working with, I got to get rid of my depression. Well, what is this thing you got to get rid of? I mean,
they're get rid of it.
That's where you deepen it into more intuitive spiritual realms. And some people do that, and most people don't. And that's why I do live streams. This isn't about getting people to meditate. This is about getting people present. And whoever you are in the present is just fine with me, as long as you're not, a maniac that wants to kill me or something. It's like, here you are in your totalness. I see you. And I mean, I've been trained to look for certain things and all of that, so I could do like a personality assessment, but that's all crap. That's all a way of saying you're less than whole. If I use a particular thing, you talked about being in your head. Well, okay, fine. Let's use that as a way of confronting your growing edges so you can start growing.
Wow. Well, William, you've shared so much with us. I think we could really probably go on for several hours. I know you're fantasizing about your lunch. Where can people, listeners, anyone who would like to work with you, how might be the best way they could do that?
Well, this is an interesting one for me. I don't really have anything set up. I do have an email, mwait@yahoo, but I'm still trying to figure out, all of the rest of this tech stuff. Part of me is really fighting it, but this is what I want to do right now. Is talking to you is perfect. This is just a dream to be able to do that. If there are other podcasters that I could talk to, this is what I can do and would love to do right now. It would be nice if I could translate this into a working financial thing, and I do need to do that. But at this point, I just want to talk. And if people have questions, if I can answer them, great. So, I've gone and I've heard some of your stuff. You have a wonderful thing going on, and what you're sharing, I think is crucial. I hope it just expands and expands and expands.
Thank you so much. It means a lot to hear you say that. I can sort of feel as I check in with my body now towards the end of our conversation, I can feel just a little bit more expansion. I can feel a lightness, and I can feel, just a more openness to just allow what is and have my day unfold from this space.
Great. Yeah, every once in a while, I notice myself, I talked about my mantra, stop, look, listen, and reflect. Every once in a while, I'll just stop, and the thought comes to me, which is also experience, I'm alive. Wow. And then, I go off into whatever that takes me. But just here we are, and we're alive, and we're infinite.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I just feel really grateful to have a chance to have you on, for you to share these kind of crazy, wild stories of everything that you've experienced from cultures that I've certainly looked to. I mean, blues and B.B. King. I listened to a lot of blues growing up, and I had the opportunity to actually meet B.B. King, just pass him by when he did one of his last concerts in DC in 2012, and it was certainly a highlight. And a highlight for my family as well, because we all sort of heard B.B. King and the blues, and having those kind of experiences were yeah, we're definitely what I would count down on feeling of like, yeah, I did that.
Yeah. Well, perhaps we'll hang out again. This was fun for me. I had a great time. And I thank you for what you're doing. I really appreciate both for myself the opportunity to just share, how life has gone through me, but
Yeah.
also, that you're doing this with many other people. And that's a wonderful thing.
Thank you, William. And to all our listeners, you just heard William share his email. We'll put that email in the show notes. We'll put some links to any of your other work that you might have on YouTube as well for people to learn more. And yeah, this has been the Light Forest Podcast, a journey of exploration to bring more light into how we live and regenerate our planet. I think we certainly have shed a lot more light, William has, over the last couple of hours. I invite you, listeners, to subscribe to the podcast on any platform of your choice. We're on Spotify, we're on YouTube, we're on Apple, and we're on the other platforms that you like. You can also subscribe on Instagram. I don't like to play the algorithm game, but we have to. This is the world we live in. So it's always grateful when you subscribe. It helps tell the algorithm gods to to share more of this with more people. And so every like and every subscribe, I think, helps exponentially bring this message to more people. So with that, thank you for listening and have a wonderful rest of the day, rest of the evening, wherever you are in the world. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.